It was a quiet afternoon at the airport. Planes came and went. People rushed to their gates. Announcements echoed from the speakers. But one boy sat calmly, reading a book. His name was Jaden. He was 17 years old. He wore a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. Nothing strange. Nothing loud. He was flying home after a school debate competition. His backpack was beside him. His phone was charging. He had done this many times before. But today, something felt different. Jaden looked up and noticed a white man in a pilot uniform walking past. The man stopped for a second, staring at Jaden. His eyes were cold, judging. Jaden nodded politely. "Good afternoon, sir." The pilot didn't answer. He kept walking. Jaden went back to his book. He didn't know that moment would change everything. A few minutes later, Jaden looked up. 2 airport security officers were walking toward him. "Excuse me, son," one said. "Can we see your ID?" Jaden blinked, surprised. "Sure, but why?" "Someone reported suspicious behavior," the officer replied. "Just a quick check." Jaden handed over his student ID and boarding pass. "Anything else?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "Mind opening your bag?" the other officer asked. Jaden's heart began to beat faster. "I don't understand," he said. "I'm just sitting here. I didn't do anything." "Sir, just open the bag." Jaden did as he was told. Inside was his laptop, some books, snacks, and his debate trophy. The officer held it up. "What's this?" "A trophy," Jaden answered quietly. "First place." The officers exchanged glances. One of them stepped away and spoke into his radio. Jaden sat still, trying not to shake. People were staring now, whispering, taking videos. He could feel the weight of their eyes. A few gates away, the pilot stood watching. The same one who stared earlier. His name was Captain Martin Blake. He sipped his coffee, pretending not to watch. "Suspicious kid," he muttered to another crew member. "You never know these days." Back at the gate, one of the officers returned. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "I'm traveling alone," Jaden replied. "You sure this isn't someone else's ticket?" Jaden pulled out his phone. "Can I call my mom?" The officer hesitated. "Who is she?" Jaden looked him in the eye. "She'll explain everything." 20 minutes later, the black SUV pulled up outside the terminal. The door opened. A woman stepped out wearing a sharp black suit. Her hair was tied back. Her eyes were calm but focused. This was no ordinary mom. She walked through the terminal without stopping. People moved out of her way. Even security guards stepped aside. She reached the gate. Jaden saw her and stood up fast. "Mom," he said, a mix of relief and fear in his voice. The officers turned to face her. She showed them her ID. Their eyes widened. She was a federal judge, a powerful one. "Is there a problem here?" she asked coldly. "No, ma'am," one officer stammered. "We were just following." She raised a hand. "Save it. I want names, reports, everything. Now." The officers backed away. She turned to Jaden, gently checking his shoulders. "You okay?" He nodded. "They thought I was dangerous." Her eyes darkened. "You're a child, sitting quietly, reading." She turned back to the officers. "My son isn't a threat, but your assumptions are." In the distance, Captain Blake started walking away quickly. But it was too late. She had seen him. "Captain," she called. He froze. She walked up to him, standing just inches away. "You made the report, didn't you?" He didn't answer. She smiled coldly. "My name is Judge Naomi Brooks. Remember it, because you're going to hear it again." Captain Blake said nothing, then turned and walked away, faster. Back at the gate, people were silent. Some looked guilty. Others nodded with respect. Jaden sat down again, his mom beside him. The crowd began to scatter. But something had changed in the air. This wasn't just a small mistake. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling, and it had happened to the wrong boy, with the wrong mom to mess with. As the plane began boarding, Jaden looked at his mom. "Why does this still happen?" he asked softly. She placed a hand on his back. "Because too many stay quiet. But not us, Jaden. Not this time." Jaden sat in the back seat of the black SUV, looking out the window. His backpack sat quietly on his lap, but his mind wasn't quiet at all. He kept thinking about what had just happened at the airport. The stairs, the security guards, the pilot, the shame. He wasn't angry, not yet. He was confused. He was hurt. His mother, Judge Naomi Brooks, sat in the front seat, typing something quickly on her phone. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned like fire. At home, Naomi's phone buzzed again and again. Emails, news alerts, messages from friends and journalists. The airport incident had already gone viral. A bystander had recorded everything. The video now had thousands of views. Jaden watched the clip silently. He could see himself on the screen, being questioned, surrounded, judged, like he was dangerous. He felt small, like he had no voice. But Naomi, she wasn't going to stay silent. That same night, Naomi made a phone call. It wasn't to a lawyer. It wasn't to the airport. It wasn't even to the news. She called someone bigger, someone powerful. On the other side of the line, a deep voice answered. "Judge Brooks." "Director Lang," she said firmly. "We need to talk." The man on the other end was the head of the Department of Transportation's Civil Rights Office, a man who had worked with Naomi on past justice cases. "Something happened," she continued. "And if we don't act fast, it's going to happen again." She explained everything. The pilot's report, the officer's treatment, her son's silence and fear. Director Lang listened carefully. Then he said just 2 words, "Send footage." Naomi hung up and forwarded the video. Things were no longer local. Now, it was national. The next day, news reporters stood outside the Brooks home. Naomi refused to speak to them. Instead, she sat with Jaden and had a quiet breakfast. "Why didn't you speak up more?" she asked gently. Jaden looked down. "I didn't want to make it worse." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "You didn't make it worse. You showed strength. But now, we speak." That afternoon, Naomi gave her first public statement. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She stood tall and strong. "My son was treated like a threat, not because of what he did, but because of what he looked like. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror, showing us what still exists in our country. But I'm not just his mother. I'm also a judge, and I demand accountability." The clip hit the internet like fire. At the airline headquarters, top officials were in panic. The CEO slammed his fist on the table. "Why didn't we handle this better?" They called Captain Blake in for questioning. He sat stiff in his uniform, avoiding eye contact. "I just thought he looked out of place," Blake said weakly. "Because he was black?" one executive asked sharply. Blake didn't answer. He was told to go home, suspended until further notice. But the damage was already done. Meanwhile, in Jaden's school, students were buzzing with whispers. "Did you see the video? That's Jaden. His mom is a judge." Jaden walked through the halls, feeling strange. Some people smiled at him. Others avoided his eyes. A teacher called him aside. "You showed courage," she said. "Never forget that." Jaden nodded, but deep inside, he still felt that knot in his chest. He didn't want to be famous. He just wanted to be treated fairly. That evening, Naomi and Jaden sat on the couch. The news was playing, showing images of protests, airport rallies, and people holding signs that read, "Flying while black is not a crime. We stand with Jaden." Judge Brooks for justice. Jaden turned to his mom. Are we doing the right thing? He asked quietly. Naomi didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes. Son, if we stay quiet, it happens again. Not just to you. To someone else. Maybe someone without a mother who can fight back. Jaden nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand. 2 days later, Naomi received a letter. It was from another mother. Her son had gone through something similar last year, but no one believed him. Your voice gave us strength, the letter said. Now I believe we can fight too. Naomi placed the letter on her desk and smiled. Not for pride, not for power, but for purpose. At the same time, Captain Blake sat alone at his kitchen table. He watched the news replay Naomi's speech again and again. He rubbed his temples and poured another glass of whiskey. He remembered something. A different boy. His own son. They hadn't spoken in years. And now, every time he saw Jaden's face, it reminded him of the son he pushed away. Because of his own anger, fear, and hate, he had made a mistake. But this one, the world had seen. Back at home, Jaden opened a message on his phone. It was from a stranger. I saw the video. I've been scared to fly for years because of how they look at me. But because of you, I feel seen. Thank you. Jaden stared at the message for a long time. And for the first time since the airport, he smiled. The news was everywhere now. Every channel, every app, every dinner table. People were talking about the black teen at the airport. Some called him brave. Others said it was just a misunderstanding. But the truth was out, and the country was listening. At the center of it all was one man hiding from the world, Captain Martin Blake. Martin sat alone in his living room, the TV turned off, the curtains drawn. The silence in his house was heavy. He hadn't flown a plane in days. The airline had suspended him pending investigation. He told the world he didn't do anything wrong. But inside, he wasn't so sure anymore. He looked across the room at an old photo frame. The glass was dusty, the corners cracked. He reached for it with shaking hands. The photo was of a smiling boy, maybe 8 or 9, holding a toy airplane. Standing next to him was Martin, much younger then, full of life and pride. The boy's name was Ethan, his son. Years ago, Martin was a proud father. He would bring Ethan to the airport, let him sit in the cockpit, teach him how to read maps and flight codes. They would laugh and dream about flying together one day. But that was before things changed, before the divorce, before the fights, before Ethan grew up and chose a different path. Ethan didn't want to be a pilot. He didn't want to wear uniforms or follow strict rules. He wanted to dance, to act, to create. Martin didn't understand. How will that pay the bills? He had yelled once. Ethan had shouted back, maybe I don't want to live life your way. That night, Martin had said something he couldn't take back. If you walk out that door, don't come back. And Ethan did. That was the last time Martin saw his son. Back in the present, Martin poured himself a drink and turned on the TV. Again, Judge Naomi Brooks was on the screen, calm and powerful. My son was profiled because of the color of his skin. No child should face that fear while doing nothing wrong. Martin sighed. He couldn't stop thinking about Jaden's face at the airport. Calm, respectful, silent, just like Ethan used to be. He had seen a hoodie and made a decision. He saw skin, not a student. Fear, not facts. And now the world had seen his mistake. Meanwhile, Naomi Brooks sat at her desk, reviewing emails. More stories were coming in. Mothers, students, travelers, all sharing similar pain. But one message stopped her cold. It was from someone anonymous. You don't know me, but I know what it's like to be judged for who you are. I want to say sorry, not just for what happened, but for the years of silence. She stared at the words for a long time. Was it from him? Captain Blake? She wasn't sure. But something about the message felt real. At school, Jaden was slowly returning to normal, or trying to. But normal didn't feel the same. Some classmates looked at him with new respect. Some avoided him, afraid to say the wrong thing. A few even whispered that he was just lucky his mom had power. Jaden didn't feel lucky. He felt exposed. "I didn't ask for any of this," he told his mom one night. "I know," she said gently, "but sometimes we don't choose the fight. It chooses us." Far away, Martin Blake sat in his car, parked outside an unfamiliar building, a community center in a mostly black neighborhood. He had come to attend a diversity training program required by the airline. He almost didn't go in. But something inside him, something soft and broken, told him to listen. Inside, people spoke about fear, about being watched, about the pain of walking through life seen as a threat. Martin didn't speak. He just listened. And for the first time in years, he really heard. Later that night, Martin pulled out an old notebook and began to write. Not about work, not about planes, but about Ethan, the son he lost. He wrote letters he never sent, apologies he never gave, dreams they never shared. And at the end of one page, he wrote something different. "To the boy I misjudged, I saw a threat when I should have seen a child. I saw my fear, not his truth. I'm sorry." He didn't know if he would send it, but writing it helped. Back at home, Naomi received a formal message from the airline. They were opening a full investigation into the incident. The CEO wanted to meet with her. They were considering a policy change, mandatory training for all staff, better complaint procedures, and new community outreach programs. Naomi wasn't impressed by words. She wanted action. But it was a start. Jaden, meanwhile, had begun writing something of his own, a short speech. His school was holding a youth forum on justice and change. They asked him to speak. At first, he said no. But later, he changed his mind. In his room, he stood in front of a mirror and read the first lines out loud. "I was judged by my skin before I was known by my story. But I'm more than a color. I'm a son, a student, a human being. And I'm not staying silent anymore." Back in his empty house, Martin Blake folded his letter and placed it in an envelope. He didn't write Jaden on it. He didn't even write Judge Brooks. He simply wrote, "To the one I failed to see." Then he left it on his desk and stepped outside. Judge Naomi Brooks wasn't just a mother anymore. She had become a voice, a leader, a fighter. What started as a humiliating airport incident was now turning into a national conversation. People from across the country were reaching out. News channels were still replaying the video. Celebrities had shared Jaden's story on social media. But for Naomi, this wasn't about fame. It was about justice. Naomi had seen the system fail before. As a judge, she had witnessed innocent lives ruined by bias. She had sent good people to prison because the law gave her no choice. And now, the system had touched her own son. This time, it was personal. She sat in her office, staring at her computer screen. Dozens of emails blinked in her inbox. Activists, lawyers, school leaders, airport officials. Everyone wanted to talk. But she didn't want talk. She wanted change. She picked up the phone and called Director Lang again, the same official from the Department of Transportation. "I'm going public with this," Naomi said. Lang paused. "Are you sure? This could get political." "I'm past politics," she said coldly. "This is about every mother who can't walk into a courtroom or a school or an airport and feel safe for her child." Lang was silent for a moment. Then he said, "We'll support you." That week, Naomi began her mission. She spoke at town halls. She met with airline leaders. She appeared on national TV. She didn't cry on camera. She didn't beg. She didn't shout. Instead, she told the story in a calm, firm voice. "My son was profiled. He was seen as dangerous before he was seen as human. If it can happen to a judge's son, It can happen to anyone's child. People listened. And more importantly, people responded. Back at school, Jaden watched his mother on TV during lunch break. A group of kids sat near him. One of them leaned over and whispered, "Your mom's kind of a superhero, huh?" Jaden gave a small smile. But deep down, he felt heavy. He didn't ask for this attention. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to be normal. That night, Naomi sat with Jaden at the kitchen table. "I saw what you wrote," she said softly. Jaden looked confused. "What?" "Your speech," she smiled. "I read it on your desk." Jaden blushed. "I'm not even sure I'll read it in front of everyone." Naomi reached out and touched his hand. "You have a voice, Jay, and people want to hear it. Not because of me, but because of you." He nodded slowly. Maybe he was ready. Meanwhile, at the airline's main office, things were getting tense. The CEO was under pressure. The public was demanding real answers, and sponsors were threatening to pull support unless the company made changes. One executive said, "We need to fire Blake publicly today." But the CEO shook his head. "Firing one man won't fix this. We need to fix the system." He paused, then added, "Let's talk to Judge Brooks. Set a meeting. Ask her what she wants." Naomi got the call 2 days later. "We'd like to fly you in for a discussion," the airline rep said. Naomi laughed quietly. "After what happened to my son, you think I'm getting on a plane with you?" There was silence on the line. Then she continued, "No, you'll come to me. And bring your legal team." Click. The airline team arrived at Naomi's office the next day, nervous, polite, and full of apologies. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't even offer them water. Instead, she placed a folder on the table. Inside were detailed notes, proposals, and evidence. She had spent the last week working with civil rights attorneys, airport staff, and government officials. Her plan had 3 demands: mandatory anti-bias training for all airline staff, from ticket agents to pilots; an independent review board to investigate racial profiling claims; a public apology, not just to her, but to every person who had faced what her son faced. The room was silent. The airline reps looked at each other. One of them said, "This is a lot." Naomi leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "What my son went through, that was a lot." Across town, Jaden sat quietly in his room. He opened his laptop and reread the message he got a few days ago from a boy in another state. "I'm only 14. I'm scared to go anywhere alone. But seeing you on the news made me feel like I'm not alone." Jaden closed his eyes. Maybe this wasn't just about him anymore. Maybe this was about every kid who ever felt afraid to just be themselves. Later that evening, Naomi came home with news. "The airline accepted everything," she said calmly. Jaden's eyes widened. "All of it. They're starting the training next month, and they're issuing a public apology tomorrow." Jaden couldn't believe it. "You did that?" he asked. Naomi smiled. "No, we did." It was a cloudy morning when Judge Naomi Brooks stepped out of her car and walked slowly toward the quiet cafe on the corner of Pine Street. No cameras, no reporters, no bodyguards, just her, and a quiet envelope in her purse, the letter that had haunted her for days. She was there to meet the man behind it, the man who had once looked at her son and saw a threat. Inside, Captain Martin Blake sat at a corner table, sipping lukewarm coffee, his uniform folded neatly on the seat beside him. He hadn't worn it since the incident. He wasn't sure he ever would again. He looked older than Naomi remembered from the news. Not physically, but in his eyes. They looked tired, like someone who had seen too much and understood it too late. When she walked in, he stood up awkwardly. "Judge Brooks," he said softly. "Captain Blake," she replied, her voice calm but firm. They sat. Silence. Martin cleared his throat. I wasn't sure if you'd come. Naomi placed the envelope gently on the table. You left me no name, just truth. That deserves a conversation. He nodded. I didn't write it for the press. I wrote it because it's been eating me alive. Naomi looked at him, her expression unreadable. What exactly has been eating you, Captain? Martin sighed. The way I saw your son, the way I judged him, the way I forgot he was just a boy. Outside, a light drizzle began tapping the cafe windows. Inside, two people, once strangers, now tied by pain, shared something rare: honesty. Martin looked down. I've flown for over 20 years, logged thousands of hours in the air. I've saved passengers during engine failures, but none of that matters now. He looked up, voice shaking. Because when it mattered most, I failed on the ground. Naomi sat still, listening, not judging, just listening. Martin continued, I don't think I'm a bad man, but that day I acted like one. And I see that now. He paused. My son, Ethan, he's about your son's age. I lost him years ago. Not to death, to silence. We argued. I didn't understand him, didn't try hard enough. He blinked back tears. When I saw Jaden that day, in some strange way, I saw Ethan. And I panicked. Not because Jaden did anything, but because I never made peace with my own failure. Naomi finally spoke. Do you know what hurt me the most? She asked. Martin looked up. It wasn't just what happened to my son. It was how easy it was for you to make that choice. No questions, no facts, just fear. She leaned forward, her voice still calm. You're not the only one. This happens every day to kids who don't have judges for mothers, kids who are alone, kids who end up arrested, or worse. Martin nodded slowly. I believe you. Naomi added, then prove it. She reached into her bag and pulled out another envelope, this one marked with an official seal. Martin frowned. What's this? A second chance, Naomi said. Inside was an invitation, not to a meeting or a conference, but to a community training program Naomi was launching, not just for police or airport staff, but for pilots, teachers, and everyday citizens. You want me to stand in front of a room and tell people I was wrong? Martin asked, surprised. Yes, Naomi said, because people listen when truth comes from the guilty. Meanwhile, across town, Jaden stood on a stage in his school auditorium, preparing for his first public speech. His voice shook a little as he began. I used to think staying quiet would keep me safe, he said. But silence doesn't protect us. It just hides us. His classmates listened closely. My mom told me once, the truth doesn't need permission to exist. That day at the airport, I didn't lose my voice. I found it. When he finished, the room stood in applause. But one face in the crowd made him stop. Ethan Blake. Yes, that Ethan. He had flown in after hearing from his father. The two hadn't spoken in years, but Martin had reached out, finally, and told him everything. I think you need to hear this, boy, Martin had said. Now Ethan watched Jaden speak with pride in his eyes. After the event, he walked up to him. Hey, Ethan said, smiling. You don't know me, but your words, they helped me forgive someone I thought I never could. Jaden looked confused but smiled back. Thanks, man. Ethan paused. That someone was my father. Later that night, Naomi told Jaden about the meeting at the cafe. He was different, she said. Not perfect, not healed, but different. Jaden looked thoughtful. Do you think people like that can really change? Naomi nodded slowly. I think people change when they see what their choices cost, when they lose something they didn't even know they had. Jaden sat back. I guess. Maybe the fight wasn't just about us, he said. Maybe it's about helping others change too. Naomi smiled. That's what leaders do. Back at home, Martin sat in his study, staring at his old pilot uniform. After a long pause, he packed it into a box and taped it shut. He wasn't quitting. He was restarting, this time with open eyes. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Naomi. "Thank you for seeing more than just the man I was. I'll see you at the first session." Then he called someone he hadn't spoken to in a long time. "Ethan," he said into the phone. There was a pause. Then a voice replied, "Hi, Dad." The city auditorium was packed. People of all colors, all ages, all backgrounds had come to hear one story. The story of a teenage boy who was once mistaken for a threat, but stood tall and became a voice for change. Jaden Brooks stood backstage. His hands were shaking. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew this mattered. A soft voice came from behind. "You okay?" It was his mom, Judge Naomi Brooks. Jaden turned and nodded. "Yeah, just nervous." She smiled and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be real." Jaden took a deep breath. Then the stage lights turned on, and the announcer's voice rang out. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jaden Brooks." The crowd stood and clapped as Jaden walked onto the stage. He looked out at the sea of faces, strangers, students, airline staff, even uniformed officers. And in the front row, Captain Martin Blake sat beside his son, Ethan. Jaden looked down at his notes, then looked up again, and chose to speak from the heart. "I didn't ask to be here," he began. "I didn't plan to become a symbol, but I'm here because one moment changed everything." He paused. "I was a 15-year-old kid who walked into an airport to visit my grandma. I smiled at a flight attendant. I wore a hoodie. I carried a backpack. And that was enough for someone to see me as dangerous." The room was silent. Jaden continued. "That moment wasn't just about me. It was about every kid who's ever been judged by how they look, before anyone asked who they are. My mom could have stayed silent, but she didn't." He looked at Naomi in the crowd. She stood up, not just for me, for all of us. Tears filled some people's eyes. Today, I speak because I can, but I also speak for the ones who can't, the ones who were silenced, ignored, or taken before their voices were heard. The crowd erupted in applause. Jaden looked at Captain Blake and added, "Even the man who judged me, he's here today, not to defend himself, but to learn. That takes courage too." Martin blinked quickly and looked down, ashamed, but also thankful. Jaden smiled slightly and ended with, "This isn't just my story, it's our story, and it's not over yet, because real change doesn't come from anger, it comes from understanding." After the speech, the auditorium stayed silent for a moment. Then everyone stood in a loud standing ovation. People clapped, cheered, and some even cried. Naomi had tears in her eyes as she hugged her son. "You were amazing," she whispered. Jaden smiled. I felt free. Later that evening, a press conference was held in the same hall. The mayor of the city stood on stage and announced, "Starting this month, all airport staff, pilots, and transit workers will undergo mandatory anti-bias training. The law has been signed, and it's named the Jaden Brooks Equity Act." Cameras flashed. The crowd cheered again. Martin Blake walked up to the stage and asked for the mic. Everyone grew quiet. He took a breath. "I was the man who reported Jaden, and I was wrong." Gasps came from the crowd. "I didn't see a child. I saw a shadow, a false fear created in my own mind, and I will carry that mistake for the rest of my life." He turned to Jaden. "But I will also carry your courage. And from today, I promise to use my story to stop others from making the same mistake." He stepped back. No applause, just silence, respectful silence. The next day, social media was flooded with Jaden's speech and Blake's confession. People were calling it the moment that moved a nation. Jaden received thousands of messages. Thank you for speaking for kids like me. You gave me hope I didn't know I needed. Your story made me talk to my son in a way I never had before. Naomi sat beside him, reading some of the messages with a soft smile. I'm proud of you, she said, but I also want you to remember something. What's that? Jaden asked. That you're still a kid. You don't have to carry the whole world. Just keep being you. Jaden leaned his head on her shoulder. Thanks, Mom. In another part of the city, Captain Blake walked through a school gym where the first bias awareness training session was about to begin. He wasn't leading it. He was there to listen. He sat quietly in a folding chair while a young trainer spoke about racial bias, perception, and empathy. One slide showed Jaden's face. Martin swallowed hard, but he didn't look away. A week later, Jaden stood in his old neighborhood, helping paint a mural on a community wall. It showed a young black boy holding a paper plane with the words, "See me, know me, respect me." Kids from the area gathered around, some asking Jaden for photos, others just smiling shyly. Jaden noticed a little girl looking at the wall quietly. He walked over. You like it? She nodded. It looks like my brother. Jaden smiled. Then your brother must be a hero. That night, as the city lights flickered outside their window, Naomi and Jaden sat quietly in the living room. No words, just peace. After a while, Naomi asked, You ready for what's next? Jaden raised an eyebrow. What is next? Naomi smiled. That's the thing about change, Jay. It doesn't stop. 2 years had passed. The city had changed. Not overnight, but slowly, like the turning of a tide. Airports now had special signs that read, Respect first, judgment never. Officers went through real training, not just rules, but real learning. People asked questions, listened more, and assumed less. And in the center of this quiet revolution stood a young man who once stood alone in an airport. Jaden Brooks. Jaden now stood taller, walked stronger. He was no longer just the boy who had been wrongly judged. He was now an author, a speaker, a mentor. But deep inside, he was still just a boy who wanted to help others feel seen. That morning, he was getting ready to speak at the National Youth Leadership Summit, the biggest crowd of his life. His mother, Naomi Brooks, watched him from the hallway. You've come a long way, Jay, she said, proud. Jaden smiled. Thanks to you. No, she said gently. Thanks to your voice. Backstage at the summit, Jaden felt nervous again, just like he had at the auditorium 2 years ago. Then, a familiar voice called from behind. You still get butterflies too, huh? It was Ethan Blake, the once estranged son of the man who had reported Jaden. Now, he and Jaden were friends. More than friends, brothers of change. Jaden laughed. Every time. Ethan handed him a folded note. My dad wanted you to have this. Jaden opened it and read the short message. You gave me a second chance to be a father. And you gave this world a second chance to be better. I'll never forget that. Martin Blake. Jaden folded the note slowly, eyes glassy. On stage, thousands of students clapped as Jaden walked out. He stood at the mic and paused, not to remember his words, but to remember his journey. 2 years ago, I was seen as a threat. Today, I am seen as a leader. But this isn't just about me. This is about all of us, about what we choose to see in each other. He told his story. He told their story. He told the story of how a boy, a judge, and a pilot, 3 very different people, became the start of something bigger. A movement, a message, a mirror for the world. After the speech, students lined up for photos and questions. Some asked for hugs. Others just said thank you. One girl, around 10 years old, held a small notebook and said shyly, I wrote about you for my school project. My teacher said you're like a real-life superhero. Jaden knelt down and smiled. You know what makes a superhero. he asked. She shook her head. Someone who tells the truth even when it's hard. She grinned wide. Later that evening, Jaden and Naomi sat at the kitchen table where it had all started, the same table where she once told him to stand up, not stay silent. Now their home had framed photos of events, awards, letters from schools, but also quiet reminders. Jaden's old hoodie, the courtroom sketch, and that simple, powerful letter from Martin Blake. Jaden looked at them. I don't want to be famous, he said quietly. I just want to make it easier for the next kid. Naomi reached over and held his hand. You already have. 1 week later, Jaden and Naomi flew to Washington, D.C. for something that once seemed impossible. The President of the United States had invited them to the Capitol. Jaden was to receive the Civic Medal of Courage, awarded to people who changed the nation through nonviolence and leadership. As they walked into the Grand Hall, cameras flashed. But Jaden wasn't nervous anymore. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to represent every child who had ever been judged unfairly. During the ceremony, the president stood and said, Jaden Brooks reminded us of something simple but powerful, that every person deserves to be seen not by fear, but by truth. He didn't use anger. He used courage. He didn't blame. He inspired. And because of him, this country is a little more just, a little more human. The crowd stood as Jaden accepted the medal. He held it up, but then looked around and spoke. This medal isn't just mine. It belongs to the kids who never got a second chance, and to the people brave enough to give one. After the event, Captain Martin Blake stood in the back, away from the cameras, watching quietly. He didn't want the spotlight. He just wanted to witness the healing he helped cause by owning his mistake. Ethan stood beside him. Proud of him? He asked. Martin nodded, and thankful, not just for what he did, but for what he allowed me to do. They turned to leave. But before they exited, Jaden spotted them and waved. Martin raised his hand slowly with a small, respectful smile. Months later, Jaden started a nonprofit called See Me, a national program that worked with schools, airports, hospitals, and businesses to teach emotional intelligence, empathy, and bias awareness. Naomi joined as the head legal advisor. Ethan volunteered as a mentor. Captain Blake helped build the aviation curriculum. Together, they didn't just tell a story. They built a future. And somewhere, on a quiet wall in a small airport, there is a framed photo of a teenage boy in a hoodie. Below it, these words are written. He changed the flight of a nation, not with anger, but with truth. The wind blew gently through the open windows of a classroom in Chicago. Inside, a group of 7th graders sat in a circle. On the screen in front of them played an old video. A young man in a hoodie standing on a big stage, speaking to thousands. Don't judge me by what I wear. Judge me by what I carry inside. The students watched quietly. One boy, Malik, leaned forward. Is that the same Jaden Brooks from the history books? The teacher smiled. Yes, and today we're going to write letters to someone who inspires us, just like he inspired a whole country. In a small office in New York City, Jaden Brooks, now 23, sat reading letters from kids around the world. Some came from rich cities, others from small villages, but all had one thing in common. Your story gave me strength when I felt invisible. Because of you, I started a club to help kids feel safe in school. You changed more than the law. You changed my heart. Jaden wiped his eyes and smiled. Still working, he whispered. Jaden now ran See Me Global, an international youth initiative across 25 countries. He trained teachers in empathy, built safe spaces in airports, and even helped write policy with world leaders. But his proudest work? A scholarship fund in his grandma's name, for Black and brown teens entering public service. One weekend, Jaden returned to the same airport where it all began. It looked different now. Colorful signs, student art, and a quiet museum in one corner titled, One Moment, the Jaden Brooks Story. A security officer spotted him walking by. "You're the reason I work here," she said. "I used to be scared of my own voice. Now I teach others how to listen." Jaden smiled. Keep teaching. Across the country, Ethan Blake had become a youth coach, working with troubled kids and former officers. His father, Captain Martin Blake, now retired, traveled with him sometimes, telling his story to pilots, not as a hero, but as a warning. "Learn to see before you act," he often said, "because one mistake can take away someone's future or give them one." Back in that classroom in Chicago, little Malik stood and read his letter aloud. "Dear Jaden, you don't know me, but I feel like I know you. You were called a threat, but you became a voice. One day, I want to be that voice too. Thank you for being the proof that one person really can change the world." The teacher wiped her eyes and clapped. Some students joined in. Some just sat quietly, thinking. But deep inside each heart, something had shifted. Something had begun. And somewhere, far away, Jaden stood looking at the sunset. His phone buzzed. Another message from another young soul. He didn't need fame. He didn't need applause. He had something stronger now. Legacy. And it lived on, not in courts or medals, but in every child who stood tall, spoke up, and believed. I am more than a label. I am someone worth knowing. And the world will see me,